going this morning, buddy?
Oh, it's going well. It's going good.
I'm excited to record another one of these conversations and have it to share with the world because I know you had a pretty good topic you wanted to bring up and talk about this morning. What was that
Yeah.
again? Remind me, I forgot already.
Well, I think that the word that you put back to me, I threw at you a couple words, and then you came
Yeah.
back and you summed it up nicely with one word. And I thought that word was consent. And that word is sort of thrown out there. But what does
Mhm.
that mean when we're in the kind of relationship that we're in? And what differentiates that from other relationships? And how does that word sort of frame what we're up to?
Yeah. When you sent this thought to me originally, what I sent back to you was my very first thought because I've talked about this at length in other places, but dom sub relationships do something that kind of vanilla traditional relationships don't do, and that's bring all of this garbage that happens in the subtext of conversations and of relating in vanilla relationships. It brings all that stuff up to the surface and lays it all out and says, let's talk about this. Like, we actually are going to decide how we decide things
Mm-hmm.
rather than just try to walk around on eggshells and avoid each other's landmines and avoid each other's stuff. So we don't play the game of avoidance in these kind of relationships. We play the game of direct communication, and we actually consent to things. And one of the things that's always kind of baffled me about people's objections or resistance to dom sub relationships is the way that dom sub relationships talk about stuff that just gets hidden and buried and avoided in any other relationship that doesn't do things this way.
Yeah, for sure. And the words that come to mind that keep going in my head is explicit and implicit. Like most relationships, there's a lot of implicit. And with this is we're about the explicit in more ways than one, right? But
Yeah.
it's about making the explicit explicit. It's about making even the implicit explicit, and it's putting a frame around things so there's clarity. And you're bringing up things we don't that often want to be avoided, and how you go about doing that, the how you go about doing it is also brought up. It's not just the thing that's brought up, but it's also how you're bringing it up that
Mm-hmm.
is consented to, that is actually predetermined. And so there's clarity for everybody involved. And even when there's a challenge, there's clarity of how you move through that challenge.
Yeah. And, I know my past, like my history with relationships before Don and I became a dom sub couple. Even our relationship for the first decade of being together was this other way. And every relationship I ever had before that was this other way. And, it's just this constant feeling of uneasiness that it always gave me. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have words for it at the time. I didn't understand what the hell was really going on. But God, like thinking back to even earlier in our relationship or in my first marriage, where I was just always trying to figure out where I stood and what was okay and what wasn't okay and what can I say and what can't I say. And that's just like it's a miserable way to live. It definitely doesn't leave a man feeling like he has it didn't leave me feeling like I had my fucking balls.
No, it doesn't. You always feel like you're doing it wrong, or you don't know what to do, or if you're trying to, move in or whatever. Like there's a lack of clarity. It's like being in a job and you don't know who's in charge, and that's the worst kind of situation. And you might be in charge sometimes, but you got to say it the right way and do it the right thing. And it might be this thing over here, and it's just, and then pretty soon you're like, fuck it, like I can't deal with this, and you just sort of slowly kind of check out and check out.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're saying here is if you make it explicit and it's consensual, how we deal with these things is we take responsibility. We being the masculine, the man says, I am responsible for this situation. Anything that's wrong in the situation, it's my fault. That's radical too.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of a charge to the word fault,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Because a lot
right.
of us, I know, shit, I went through most of my life just constantly blaming myself for everything that went wrong,
Right,
constantly putting like, and in a way that shows responsibility, right? It shows that I wanted to be able to be in charge of my life. I wanted things to go the way that I wanted them to go because I was always coming back to me. Like,
right.
what is it about me that's not right here? But for me, and I'm curious to hear how this has played out for you similarly or differently, but it's not, I don't see it as a fault thing anymore. I really see it as, at least in the way that I use the word fault, I don't see it as a fault thing for me anymore. It's more like when things aren't going the way that I want them to, there's something that I need to take responsibility for. There's some place that I need to step up. And I
Right.
used to put a lot of pressure on myself and a lot of blame on myself, but now it's just more because of the relationship the way that it is, because of the dom sub dynamic in our relationship the way that it is. I now know for sure that I can make changes with the way that I'm going about living my life and leading our life and actually impact things and make them into how I want them to be. So there's a lot less pressure that I put on myself than I used to. And there's a lot more empowerment, I guess, if you want to use that word, to just know that I can
I think
impact things.
yeah, and it's like able to respond. Responsibility, I think is a good way of saying it. It's like, it's my responsibility. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that gets rid of fault. It's like I have the ability to respond to the situation, to choose how I'm going to respond to the situation. And that I have that agency in all times, no matter what's occurring, no matter what's going on with her, no matter what misinformation is coming my way, no matter what's going on in the world, I can choose how I'm going to respond to that. And there's a stimulus and then my reaction. What's that space in between? And that's that freedom that we have, that we get to do and we get to decide, and maintaining that agency and that authority and working through that. That's literally the freedom that gives us the power. Like our capacity to do that well is where we stand in our power. And that's what we're consent to. When we, like, I want to come back to that consent, where what I wrote to you is about rules and about protocol and about these things that we enter into, but that they're agreed upon ahead of time. What is it that we're agreeing upon? I think just to kind of map this out and frame this, like, let's step back and say, okay, what is actually, like, what are we entering into when we come into this relationship? Most relationships you go into, I love you, you love me, we love how we love getting it on, we want to be together, we want to live together, but like, wow, we're just two human beings trying to kind of like work through, and then trauma comes up and then shit comes up and there's all this other stuff that comes up. But how do you navigate the challenging moments and the challenging times, and how do you even navigate the great times, and who's in charge, and what happens this, and how do you navigate all of that without pushing down the woman in a way that really feels like she's not being empowered, she's kind of
Mm-hmm.
being put down, because it seems like the options are either like this, or he's raising and she's lowering, or it's that he's kind of neutral and she's neutral and they're all getting along, but that doesn't really work well. And then the other options, you don't really know what that other option is. Like, how does this work? I think what we're trying to offer, what you speak about really eloquently, is that there is a third way. There's a way that seems very much on the surface like it looks like this part where the woman is put down and the man is up here. But as you peel away the layers, you're realizing, oh, wait a second, there's a natural energy here between these two things that if you really own and really bring out into the explicit, it actually sort of works. And you're starting to create some sort of energy or something between each other that people call polarity that that creates an atmosphere that you can kind of check in on and say, are we in that feeling or are we not? And when we're there, we know we're doing it right. And when we're not, it's not working. And how do you kind of get back to that? And that's what we're consenting to, is to say, hey, I want to be in this place that, for lack of a, I know it's people get, I know I'm in a safe place to be able to say this here, but I'm going to say the masculine and then the feminine. And so if you're in these two energies, it creates this place for us to be able to have what we call polarity. And in that polarity, when it's not in polarity, you can feel it. And when it is, it is. And that's what we're consenting to. I feel like that's the thing, is an agreed upon thing that says we will maintain this. And if it's off, we're going to work to reboot it. And that is I mean, it's submissive and it's dominance. You're just taking the polarity word and world and saying and calling it a spade. And that's what you're saying. It's like, but it's a conscious, and that's the conscious dom sub. It's not, it's the fact that she's consenting to this. She's not just consenting in a way like, oh, maybe I'll do it because you want me to. It's like, no, the feminine actually loves it. She wants it. She's desiring it. As long, with the big caveat, as long as she's got a voice in that and managing, and how do you navigate her voice and her empowerment with your empowerment, that becomes the relationship. That becomes the question. Like, how does she rise into her flourishing while being submissive? That's the art of it. It's an art. It's not a mechanistic kind of machine kind of thing. That's why you have a podcast.
And that's why the rules and the rituals and all of the stuff that we do in dom sub relationships have to have a purpose. They have to have a why behind them.
Yeah.
If you get into a dom sub relationship and you just go download a list of rules that you found on the internet somewhere, and you're like, okay, submissive, like, here's the things that you're supposed to do now because you're submissive, and she starts trying to force herself to do those things, you just, like, you don't have anything real there. You don't have anything authentic there. And that's what this dom sub thing is to most people, really. But also their desire for it and their call to it, I think, is really a call to this desire to do the man-woman relating thing in a way that actually works and supports both people. Because most good men don't want power over their woman. They want to win together. They want to be able to have the win-wins where everyone is having their needs met. So being able to lay out rules in the relationship that support the ultimate expression of each person in their true essence.
True. And I think part of the rules too, the protocol, is just the basics of creating a container. It's creating a structure. It's creating an order. It's literally, yes, it's there to say, hey, do this or whatever, that kind of thing. But ultimately what it's doing is to make it so the feminine energy, the flowing energy, bumps up against something and then can go into things and knows where it stands and knows what's what, and knows how the day begins and how the day ends, and knows that if in this situation, if we're going to go out, he's got it. You know, he's got it. He's got where we're going. He's got when we're going. He's got the whole situation covered. She knows that in the financial situation that he's aware of what's going on, and he's maintaining the order there. He's maintaining the structure of that. He knows that when you know, the working through, if there's weather coming to the wherever, that he's got it. There's a structure, there's a way, there's a protocol for life. And that's what I feel like the consent and the rules is to say, hey, I'm going to enter into this. It's essentially like you're a ship going, you know, and when you enter onto that ship, there's a captain, and that captain, you know, there's a way the ship's run. That's essentially what this kind of relationship is. Like, you're consenting to coming aboard and you're the captain of the ship.
So here's another thing around this idea of consent in these relationships that I'd love to hear you reflect on, like your own personal experience with it. But consent means agreement, right? There's a heady element to the idea of consent.
Mm-hmm.
It's a it's an agreement, it's a decision, it's something you can talk through.
Mm-hmm.
And consent is a lot of times looked at, I think, through the lens of being this, like the finish line, like, great, we've consented to this. Now it's going to be
Yeah.
like this.
Right. Right.
Where, and I used to think it was that way too. I mean, 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago now, when Don and I sat down and started discussing transitioning our relationship from a unconscious vanilla marriage into a 24/7 dom sub dynamic, it was all about consent. What's okay, what's not okay, what do you want, what do you not want, what do I want, what do I not want? And we get this set of things down. Usually we type them out or write them out, like, this is what we both agreed to. But then living inside of that consent doesn't actually make any of that come alive. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it real. It just kind of outlines what the expectations and the boundaries are. So then that's where the real challenge comes in. And that's where the practice of dominance and submission as a way of relating and not just as a way of fucking is really important, I think, because we get to now say, okay, I said I wanted this. Turns out that's hard as shit to actually live that way, or to, especially for Dawn, it's been really challenging at times, because she'll say, like, yes, I consent to that, I want that, I agree to that, I even really know, like, I know that's really important for me. But then in the practice of making that real, it's way harder than it seems. So consent doesn't equal desire, and it doesn't equal
It
it
doesn't
doesn't
equal
mean that it's easy.
lubrication. You know what I
Right.
mean? It doesn't actually equal the verb. It's like saying, okay, we could go in there, but you still got to play the game. Like, here's the rules of
Yeah.
the game. Here's what we agree upon. But once you're there, you still actually have to bump up against life and do it. And I think that that's really the practice, and that's what you speak about. I was looked up the etymology of consent. I just was thinking about it. I was like, that's an interesting word. I've never kind of thought deeply, like, on below just the definition of it and just the way that we've sort of bandied it about. But it literally comes back from Latin, from con, which is together, and then sent, which is feeling, like siente. So it's like together feeling. And I thought that added a whole other layer of meaning to it that I really liked. Because, like, I felt like the consent at the beginning, it seems like you said, a very heady kind of thing that you go into it. But once you're in it, your heart, like, try fucking a woman with a closed heart that she's in love with you. She feels that. Like, you can go and dominate, but if you're blocking off some pain from your day, or you're not really fully feeling the moment, she might consent to it because you've agreed upon it, but you're not together feeling. Like, it's not that next layer that really opens up the door to create these ecstatic moments. You might just have a kind of a perfunctory experience. And I think a lot of the DS world, if you don't get into this nether layer of it, it becomes very performative, and people perform these actions. But as you know, and I think as we've been around, when we're around the feminine, when she's not performing and she feels an open heart and she feels contained, she can go to places that are really out of this world. And a lot of times those are, she's experienced those early in the relationship, but how do you maintain that again and again and again later? That's what we posit, that this, and it is a reality. Like, it does happen, that these things that become these challenging moments, or these things that before would have constrained, as we open up our heart and from a place of vulnerability, but still maintaining not a, like, I'm going to dump my shit out kind of vulnerability, but an open place with strength, and then to still proceed in that container, we really can kind of pierce something and open something that really brings not only sexuality, but just life to another whole place that feels so much more, sumptuous.
What's that work been like for you to be able to open your heart? Because I know from our past conversations, we both have had to do our work around
That's the
letting,
hardest thing. That's the hardest thing. There's nothing
yeah,
harder. You know,
it's,
the hardest thing, and that's the biggest surprising part. It's almost like there's different stages if you were to map this out. It's kind of like I always think of things as like chaos order, you know, like the Chinese, they have periods of chaos and then order and then chaos. That's sort of, you know, yin yang, kind of this
mhm,
sort of cycle of the way we think about it. And so we go through an unconscious, incompetent stage of life. And then we kind of come into the start and you start gaining some confidence, but you become consciously incompetent. And I think as you kind of enter into this, like I came in with a lot of bravado and a lot of like, I got this, I'm like the man, you know, and I had that
yeah,
capacity,
I'm the
especially,
Dom, you're the sub. We're like,
yeah,
this is
we're
how it's
doing
going to
this,
go.
it's the relate, this is how it's going to go. And I could do that in a short-term relationship and I could be in that energy. But to really truly be in a long-term relationship with a very powerful woman who's you know out in the world and doing things and showing herself and being this person, she's got zero, she just will, if I'm coming at it and I'm overriding something in my life that's messed up or that I messed up on or that I'm not addressing or I'm really and I'm feeling it because I'm shrinking or whatever, that's literally what makes us go limp and it's what makes us, we can override it but she feels it and she might go along with it but she's not going to open up and you feel like something's off and it feels a little disjointed and it literally feels like when gears start clunking. And it's counterintuitive, but the way forward is actually not with her, but take yourself away and have some work over here, where you could actually spend some time feeling with yourself or with Andrew, where you could go through and you feel and you feel and you feel what are you feeling like? What is it that thing that you're sitting with, and what are the things that you're most afraid to feel? And being able to hold yourself in those places of those feelings and really being able to be compassionate to yourself, to the little boy in you, to this little part of you that is looking to the woman for her mom, his mom, or looking to the world for validation or whatever these things are that
Yeah.
creates a kind of a needy situation out in the world. When we can, the most powerful thing and the most freeing thing we can do is to actually start loving ourselves, to actually start being self-compassionate, to actually start sitting. And it's the parts of us that we don't really like. And it's like when you start to do that, you can then unlock something that allows you to work on those things. The parts of us that we don't like, they're being blocked by parts of us that are trying to protect the world from seeing it. But we're
Mhm.
also protecting ourselves from actually working on it. But when we can actually feel it, and it does sort of take us out for a moment. And if you can still live your life and you've got to be disciplined though and say, okay, I'm gonna go fall apart from 5 in the morning to 7 in the morning. And then I'm gonna come back and put myself back together and go on with my day. But if you don't do this, and now you haven't always done this, what happens? You get into addictions and you get into like distractions and other shit that just trying to avoid feeling these things.
This
And
is this is what happens with men when we suppress
yeah,
things is we're afraid of showing what we think is weakness, right?
yeah,
Like when I had never really let myself be angry about some of the shit that I went through as a kid,
yep,
and I had just shoved that shit down, right? I had just
yep.
stuffed it down in there. That feels like weakness to let that out. And that's why I think a lot of men, I know it's why I avoided it. It's like I didn't want
Well,
to.
it is weakness to let it out any old time. It's about timing. It's about knowing when to let it out and how to deal with it. It's not about never letting it out. It's knowing like the right setting, the right context to let it out and deal with it.
Yeah, but that's when it's still stuck in here and it's only coming out in shadow expressions. It's only coming out in the ways that we are trying to get some need met. Like you said, like we're projecting that we have this big insecurity and it feels really weak, but it's actually the strongest thing that I've ever, like, it's required the most strength in my whole path towards a more conscious approach to masculinity, towards, and my desire in all of my growth has been single pointed. It's, I want to see how much I can embody the masculine ideal. I want to be the man that every man wants to be and the man that every woman wants. That's what I'm kind of after in myself, is how much can I embody the ideal masculine by being myself, by being authentic to who I am. So there hasn't been anything where I've had to be stronger than to like go into therapy and go into EMDR therapy and do some work on healing my trauma, on healing my pain, because I've had to like draw the shit out that I stuffed way down there. I've had to pull it back out to the surface and really look at it and let myself get angry about things I was never angry about before. And like, it's vulnerable, but
yeah, there's nothing harder, right?
We confuse vulnerability with weakness, when really
Right.
vulnerability is, it's taken more strength than anything else that I've done. And then the process of going through that is what has allowed me to then come into this relationship with Tana and hold a grounded strength, and not a strength that I'm trying to cover up this thing that is stuffed.
No, I feel it so much what you're saying. I resonate so much with it. And I just want to say I see you with that. And I feel like you've really done that. I feel that capacity that you have to hold trying situations is commensurate with your capacity to hold yourself in your wallowing in your shit. Like, the degree to which you can hold yourself and your stuff is the degree to which you can hold someone else and theirs, and not get ruffled or get triggered by that. And I feel like what you're saying, I very much relate to. So,
and that all comes back around to this idea of how we put these relationships together and how we lead them. If we are trying to do like dominance and submission in a conscious way, is it requires a lot of that inner strength that I couldn't have for me. I want to make this about myself.
Yep.
Like, I couldn't
it's that heart thing. If you don't go in there, why do we close our heart down? Because we don't want to, if we start feeling and opening it up, we're going to fall apart. And she feels that, and you can only go so far. You can only do so much. But when you open up your heart, you start getting more sensitive, like we've talked about. You start feeling things. You go to some other level that you've never been to, that she's never been to. Because part of the whole thing, the prerequisite of this whole thing, as you kind of get into this, is you're going to uncharted territory. If you think you know everything and you've got to be only in places where you know everything, you're fucked. Like, because there's a limited pie. What do you think? You're going to imagine everything and got control over everything? The key is to be really, really comfortable and confident in the unknown territory, in unknown places, in places you've never been. And the only way to do that is to open your fucking heart so you can feel it, and you could feel your whole self and all of you. Because otherwise, if you're not feeling all your stuff, you're going to get sidetracked by something in yourself that you're unconscious of. And that's going to derail the whole situation, because it'll start building up. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, where did that come from? And then you're like, or you react or you do whatever else thing, and you're fucked. And so the whole point is you got to feel yourself so you can regulate yourself in these moments. It's like a sport.
You can't live with integrity if you're covering up insecurity.
Exactly.
You can't live with authenticity. You can't be authentic.
And she could feel it. And
exactly.
That's why you got to inventory. There's got to be a thorough inventory of your inside and all of your trauma and all of your work and all of the things where you feel like you're a piece of little poop and weakness, and sit with it all. You know what I'm talking about, though. And then
absolutely.
The thing is, you can't go to her to feel better. This is the radical thing. This is the consent. Like, you're not saying, I'm not going to you to feel better. And that's what most guys got it wrong. They go to their woman to feel better. I go to the woman to hold, because it just is like, it's not to get something. It's just, I'm not even going to her. I'm just in. She's just here. She's coming to me.
And it doesn't feel fair, right? When we've been raised in a like
Oh
when we've been raised thinking that everything's supposed to be fair,
no,
we're raised in a
it's not
culture
fair.
where we think relationships are supposed to be equal. We're supposed to be the
No,
same. And so because at the same time as I like, yes, if I'm feeling heavy, deep pain, I can go to Dawn and
right,
she will be there with me in that. And there are times when that's just the only thing you can do, right? Like
right.
something really tragic happens in your life, you're going to go to your partner and you're just going to be in it. So this is something that I think when guys start hearing the stuff that we're about to talk about here, I'm prefacing it with this isn't a perfection thing. This isn't like it's always going to be this way. But if you want to do this in support of polarity, you have to understand that you're dealing with opposite things here and not fairness. Because
The rules don't the
it,
same. The rules for me are different than the rules for her.
yep,
And that,
because
and most of life, we think we have to have the same rules. There's different rules. Own that. But you
and
get bonus that she doesn't get, and she gets bonus that you don't get.
yeah, it's the nature of the opposite, right? Of the
Yeah.
complementary opposite, because I can't go to her to feel better every time that something hurts or every time that
Mm-hmm.
I'm working through something that is painful in me that I've seen and I need to deal with. If I process that with her or bring that emotion to her because I want her to make me feel better, now I've put her in the role of the masculine because
Yep.
the masculine and it and this probably needs to be said in these kind of conscious dom sub roles, masculine doesn't mean man. But what we're doing in these kind of conscious dom sub roles is we are saying that if I am a man who is essentially a masculine being, I'm taking the role of embodying the masculine space, the masculine side of the equation. I'm going to step into that energy, and Dawn, as the submissive, is going to step into the embodiment of the feminine. And I'm going to stay out of her energy as much as I can, and she's going to stay out of mine so that we can interact at the place where those two things touch. So what it really means for me is the masculine expression is the receptive heart. We are the receiver of emotional energy. And so if we're the receiver of emotional energy in a relationship where we want that polarity to work, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm vomiting my emotions out to her, if I'm processing my shit with her, I'm putting her in the role of the receptive heart. I'm putting her into the masculine space and
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking on the feminine space. I'm playing her role, she's playing mine,
Mm-hmm.
and we lose the connection or the energy, or the way that Dawn says it is that doesn't make me wet. Like it
Yep.
she'll do it if she needs to. Like something tragic happens in my life, I'm not going to like act like I'm okay until I go process it on my own and come back to her.
Right.
But if I'm trying to use her as a sounding board to work through all of my shit, I'm constantly putting her in the energy of essentially seeing me in all of my pain. Where if I can work through that with other men, if I can work
Mm-hmm.
through that in therapy, if I can work through that, I do a lot of it in meditation and journaling so
Mm-hmm.
that I can step into that relationship and just
And I
bring my
think what
strength.
you're saying is a really important point that I want to bring up that I really feel for myself too. It's not to say we don't process. It's not to say that we don't have trauma, that we aren't working through things. If we look at our life as a whole, there's always something in it that's off,
Mm-hmm.
that we're in process with, that we're struggling with. And we've got kids, we've got work, we've got all kinds of stuff. There's always the world, whatever. But it's how we deal with that. And it's the fact that we own that we feel that way and that we're able to process that and that we're digesting that and acknowledging it. We're not ignoring it, and we're addressing it, but we're not
Mhm.
bringing that in a sloppy way unconsciously to her and saying, here, you solve it,
Yeah.
you fix it, you bring it. This, I'm going to say this really kind of succinctly, and I think it might be kind of radical to say this, but you bring products to her. You don't bring a process to her. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You bring the final thing. It's the decision. It's the way. This is what's happening. This is the thing. If you are needing to bring a process, and there, I have things all the time that I have to bring, but I'm going to know that I'm doing that, and I'm going to state that that's there, and I'm going to try to contain that myself so it doesn't leak over into the rest of my life. But that the default, the thing we're consenting to is the default is I'm bringing the container quality, which I take to mean the product, the definitive, with something that you can bounce up against and know where we
Yeah.
are, whether it's through time or whether it's through the energy or whatever it is. And that, I think, something that you bring up really well there, that open heart part of us. If there's no way, if we're not acknowledging in our own self, we're not going to be able to receive her love either. We're not going to be able to receive the thing that's the most plenteous thing. Like the whole point of this is we get just in her presence when we're doing this right, we're just getting like all this juice that's just amazing. It's not even
Mhm.
about the act. The act is almost beside the point. That's a byproduct. Any sort of sexual submission, she'll do that, whatever. You have
Yeah.
her like literally doing whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. But you don't even need to do it because it's just the energy is fine. You might do
Yeah.
it because it's fun and it's playful, but sometimes you're just like, whatever, I don't even need to go there. And that's fun too. And you might even just talk about it. And it creates a situation where even just dinner, just regular stuff becomes erotic. Everything becomes sort of charged.
And that's why we talk about the relationship so much in everything that we do, in everything we share. We don't talk about the kink side of dominance and submission. And people just assume that Don and I don't have a kink side to our dom sub dynamic. We just don't talk about it because you know what? That part comes naturally when you get the relational part right.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
part of
yeah.
it and the part of it that doesn't feel fair at first until you've done this work, until you've like until I did this work to really set down my pain, to face it, to deal with it, to
Mm-hmm.
accept it, process it, and let it go. It didn't feel fair, but still, while I can't go to her and be the place that I'm constantly looking for validation and reassurance and to feel okay, that's exactly what I need to be for her. I need to be the place where she can come to feel okay. I need to be
Yep.
the place where I can hold all of that emotion, all of that pain as she works through it and releases it. And I remember I said to Dawn one time when I got this, like when it landed for me, not just up here, but it landed. I remember telling her, you know what? All of your emotions are love to me. Whatever you feel that you're willing to share with me and give to me, I'm going to, from now on, I'm going to choose to receive all of that as your love. Because this energy goes one way, right? If it's going from her into me, I can't decide which parts I accept and then tell her, no, you don't feel like that. I can't handle you feeling like that, but I want you to love me. I want you to give me affection. I want this. I
That
want this, but shut that off, shut that off, shut that off.
Yep, yep, yep.
I've got to
And
let
when
her
you say
feel.
that first, I want to say this too. I've heard that before and said that, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's craziness. Like, you don't. It doesn't sound. That sounds insane. Like whatever you're talking about, and it seems martyry too. You're like, what? I'm going to sit here and take all that. But you're totally right. I've been experiencing that lately, and there's nothing. You feel like it's just all just like and it you can't even differentiate. It's just this energy and motion through you that you're holding, and it feels, and it doesn't. It's not like it's painful. It literally feels like love. It's not like you're having to change it into something else in the moment. Oh no, when you're working at it, you're not there yet. It's like when you're there, you really know you're there, and it's exquisite. And what happens to her in those moments, right? Tell me,
Yeah.
like it changes her. And maybe not that night. She might not say anything, but that next day, she's going to look up at you like, Ooh, like you guys, you just had the best stack, but it's even better. Like it's something.
Well, here, let's do this to get some feedback on this, because we're going to have women who listen to this podcast, and they're going to hear what we're talking about here. And so I want to hear, if you're watching this on YouTube, I want you to go in the comments and share, what would it feel like if a man told you that no matter what you feel, I'm going to consider that love, and give you absolute freedom and complete unconditional acceptance of whatever feeling you're feeling in the moment, to just let it flow, and for him to be there and to just hold all of that for you. What would that feel like? Share that with us in the comments. Because I think guys don't believe that this is actually something that women
And I also want, I
receive
want to
in a
put a
way as
caveat. I want to put a caveat
yeah.
because I've been with women that are violent. I've been with women that are take it to a boundary and to a place that's, I'm saying there's an established container that we're talking about, and that woman's not going past a boundary that you've set up for yourself. So there is a caveat to that. I'm not sitting here being like the woman's coming at you and you're going to receive it. Maybe that's possible, and that we'll get there. But I'm talking about what we're feeling into is just feelings and emotions that she's having, and you've already been in this. There's already like kind of the way it works and functions between you.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that's the difference. That's why I just want to kind of say, because I've also been where I'm like, that's definitely not. I'm just kind of wanted to throw that out there as a.
Yeah, I'm not talking about a man opening himself up to being abused here.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say with that. We're not sitting here being like a. There's something you're holding in it. It's not abuse. And there's a difference between abuse and expression. And a woman
but
can just be expressive.
but also, I know that when a man has the walls up around his heart, a woman's natural expression of being like angry
Feels
about
like
something
abuse.
feels like abuse.
Yeah,
Like
it's
it
true. It's
feels
true.
very, very unsafe to a man who has a closed heart to
That's a
sit
good
with
point.
to sit present in presence
That's true. And
and be okay
I think you're right.
in the
And I think it
present of her.
grows. It grows, and it becomes, because eventually, I mean, way down here, we're talking unconditional love, where no matter what happens, I'm going to receive it at love. We're talking Jesus over here. This is the Christ consciousness. But I do feel like these relationships, they help us in this movement towards that. Like that's the point of them.
Yeah, and so yeah, we're not talking about abuse, but also we don't necessarily know what we can and can't take. And so the a lot of the really unhealthy expression that comes from the feminine usually comes because it's been suppressed. It's not been allowed, and she doesn't feel safe to feel it. And so if there's a calm, like, I'm here with you, whatever it is that you're feeling is okay. And if there's a genuine acceptance and a groundedness to your willingness to receive her, I believe that what you're going to get in response to that kind of an open hearted receptivity to whatever the pain is that she's feeling is going to be a more genuine expression than if you're approaching it with like, all right, go ahead, say whatever you want to say. And now she feels like she has to break through those walls to
Yeah.
get
You're right.
through to you.
And I think what I'm hearing too, what I feel too, is that it becomes a practice. It becomes part of the relationship. It's not something that's a one-off. It's not something only when you're in a frustrating argument. If you're doing this right, if you are in a very masculine pole, your woman is going to express in all kinds of ways
Yep.
frequently. Like this is not
And
a,
it's only
a
going to get bigger.
yeah. And there's going to be things that, yeah, bigger and more unpredictable. and more like layered and more just kind of erratic. And your role is to create the container for her to do that. And she might break through those containers too. And you're like, okay, let's get this. And you're kind of doing this with it.
We're talking a lot in concepts here, but I want to give a practical example of this, because there was a point within the last couple years where Dawn finally came face to face with the fact that she was like, she had never, ever, ever let herself be angry.
Mm-hmm.
She had never let herself be angry about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not going to like lay bare all of her private traumatic experiences from her life, but she's been through some shit.
Right.
And the way that she had always dealt with it is like, well, I understand. And, maybe that person was going through something too. And she just put herself last and pushed down any of her own feelings about any of the things that happened in her life. And so
Mm-hmm.
as I grew in my own strength, she came to feel safer and safer and safer. Oh, and by the way, I've done things in that first 10 years of our relationship, ways that I showed up, things that I like did poorly that hurt her too. And she had anger about those things that she had never let herself feel.
Mm-hmm.
So as I start to step forward, as I start to grow and become stronger, do this work to become more vulnerable and open, but also stronger in how I show up in life, now all of a sudden that container that you talk about, she's feeling safer to feel
Mm-hmm.
what she feels. And so those feelings, they start to come out of her. That's what you're getting at and what I say when I'm like, this gets bigger as we grow. It doesn't get smaller. You don't get to squish her down to a point where she's just always this meek, quiet little thing. A submissive in this
No,
kind
it's
of
more,
relationship is expressive, and she takes up
it's life.
space.
It's boy, it feels very fecund. You know that word fecund. It feels like vital in life, and you
Yep.
feel it in the energy, and you feel it in her. And it's not always the detritus is as much. I mean, I keep thinking about the metaphor of I've been around farmers and farming, and I come from a background of Waldorf, and there's a term called biodynamic farming, which is related to regenerative farming, which is this idea that takes organic farming on a whole other layer and really includes a lot more biodiversity, and it really includes taking things that are rotting and things it's not necessarily like clean, organized, monocultural, use
Mm-hmm.
pesticides, kind of this structured kind of farming. It works through and really focuses on the soil and soil health and soil, so that the plants become sort of byproducts of the fecundity, all of this. And sometimes you're going to have weeds and you're going to have all this kind of stuff. And it feels to me that's what we're talking about. Like regenerative farming is like conscious Dom sub. And the old school Dom sub is monoculture, kind of like, fucking the whole way that we grow with pesticides and everything. Like that's the
Yep.
old school.
There's only
And
one
people
thing
back
that's okay. Everything
one
else
thing,
needs to
it's
be
okay.
wiped
And
out.
here's what, and we're gonna just wipe it all out. And I'm in
Yep.
charge, and I'm the only boy. That only lasts for what, 7 years, 8 years, 9. Pretty soon, there's dust. Things are. It doesn't work, and the health of the plant's not even that great. So, and this one, you're gonna have to tolerate a certain amount of chaos, a certain amount of wildness, a certain amount, and your capacity to hold that and see death and challenges as something that's going to nurture this regenerative quality. Like that's the secret sauce. That's where you start getting into this other realm with sex and like tantra and these things, is like you're cultivating this place where you don't know everything, but in the not knowing, you know that you're going to be able to alchemize that into something. And that can only happen if you retain an open space and you're really able to feel all of these things. It feels very spontaneous. It's like
Yeah.
cultivating a spontaneous quality, but there's a structure and order to it. And I think so many people, we don't want the old school model, but they don't get this new school model. So they're in sort of this yucky middle place where there's nothing, everything's implicit, there's no consensual. They're wanting something that's wild, but they'll revert back to this. But this seems
Yep.
a little too crazy. They don't even know it's possible. And so, but this requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of discipline, and it requires really, really, really being able to go through, for lack of a better word, the darkness, the dark night of our soul, to fall apart, to go through that
Hmm.
chrysalis stage, to have our midlife crisis become something. I heard this guy recently say it's a midlife chrysalis. I like that. This chrysalis stage where we're decomposing and falling and being able to, and then come out of that into something it's it's not rigid, and you can
Yeah.
have great vital life ahead of you, but you've got to be in that space where you can see the challenging things as regenerative. You automatically have something hard happen, you're like, good.
Well,
It's like,
that's the that's the thing that happened is I grew in this strength and Dawn started feeling safer to feel what she felt. All of a sudden, this anger that she had kept suppressed her whole life, now all of a sudden she can feel it.
yep,
And as she learns how to let herself feel it and get angry about things she had every fucking right to be angry about in her
yep,
life, at first that feels really terribly unsafe to a part of me that doesn't feel safe around feminine anger.
right.
So then I have to grow more. I have to get stronger in order to allow more of that emotion, that chaos, that because it is a chaotic expression when a woman lets her emotions roar, like she is a lion. There's a lot of energy
Oh,
there, especially if it's been suppressed. And so I continue to have to grow stronger for her to feel safe enough to get bigger. And so she takes up more space and she gets more emotional and more expressive as I get stronger. But I'm also able then to contain that. I'm able to hold it for her. So then we get to a point in this whole process of her letting herself be angry about things she has every right to be angry about, where I'm sitting there and I'm like, is there more?
right, right.
Have you felt it all, or is there more? And I can just be there with her. Sometimes I'm holding her. Sometimes I'm just sitting there on the bed witnessing her while she's thrashing around and punching pillows and just letting herself get pissed. Sometimes she is just venting at me about things that I did
That's
10
the
years
hardest.
ago.
That's the
It's
hardest.
it's the it's the absolute hardest, but when she can let herself feel that and I can stand there and be like, I've got you. Like, I
Yep,
want to know
yep.
everything
That's the secret sauce right there.
because now she's getting to let go of everything that she's suppressed, all that stuff that keeps her like her true expression, all of her love and her joy is a lot of times buried underneath all of the shit that she shoved down because she didn't feel accepted in feeling it or safe enough to feel it.
Right.
And so
Yep.
now, like, I can get to a point, and I have gotten to this point, which I was not at before, where if there's something that I've done in the present or in the past that upset her, she can be upset with me about it, and I don't have to collapse. I don't get defensive. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to justify myself. I can just let her share it with me, and I can receive it and decide what to do with it for myself, and she can just get it off of her chest without me trying to limit her in any way.
That's hard. I mean, every day. Don't you bump up against that every day, like in little ways? I was just today, I did something where I put something away and it was in a way that was different than the way, and she didn't usually say anything, but she kind of said something in a little way. And I got a little bit like she was right. I was unconscious in what I had done, and she was bringing consciousness to it. And that's her role. Like, her role is to be like, dude, you're, even the little things that we think are no big deal, when we're not in our conscious, like bringing consciousness to it, she's going to call it out, and I've been terrible at this, by the way, like god awful most of my life, defensive, bad temper, all over the place, kind of a mess of emotions and a mess of it. And it's only been through fully being in a relationship like this that I have a structure for myself to be able to really, really look and examine all of these moments. I mean, I wouldn't have been in this relationship if I hadn't done already a lot of prerequisite work, but that work only got me to a point. And it's like, now that I'm here, I'm able to be like, oh yeah. And it's interesting you should say that. Just the other day, Rachel, she came to me just started talking and was talking about some of these things that happened early in our relationship that were really like not cool on my part. And the degree to which they were not cool was really high. And she just hadn't said anything because it was like the early stages and early things. And she was really hurt by it. And I had to feel her hurt. Like I had to feel her pain. And I find this thing that is helpful for me. I tell her this. I say, if I don't feel from you that what I did is upsetting, I actually don't have the little thing that makes me want to, that like motivates an improvement, or at least I can register, is this worthy of being addressed or is this not? If it just feels neutral and you're really good, and I think a lot of women these days are really good at being men and being stoic and like hiding their emotions and not being a mess because they've been conditioned, especially ones that are out in the world and told,
Well,
they have to do
let's
that.
they're good at being the same kind of men that men are good at being, which is the
Yeah,
kind of men who don't express themselves and who don't
right,
aren't connected to the
right.
deeper part of their
And
emotional experience.
exactly, and not really able to bring those things together. And so she's now been expressing more of herself and expressing these fuller things, and it comes up. And there are some times where you're already dealing with something in your own life that she doesn't even know about. I call it stacking. And
Mm-hmm.
so she's stacking that on top of that. And because my foundation feels off, if she gets me at the wrong time and she stacks that on top, and then I fall,
Yep.
and it's not so much like what she was doing. If that was at a different time, I would have been able to hold it. And it just shows you where, like, oh, wait, these foundational things, like every time they're important, is what the finish of that. But every time there's any sort of trigger, any sort of fall, I find it to be like a housing inspector where you're looking around, or I'm working on a job site. I used to do a lot of construction. And when you see something's wrong, you actually, if it's early, especially if it's early stages of development of the project, you're glad to see that because you can fix it. You don't want to, if you have any amount of integrity, you like knowing when things are off
Yep.
so you could fix them. I mean, not say to say you like it is strong, but you'd much prefer knowing that that was a mistake or there was something wrong with that situation to be addressed than not knowing about it. That's the same thing in a relationship. Every time you falter, every time you get a little wobbly, it's literally like the studs getting some mold. Like there's some mold there. There's some rot. There's something there that's making it, or they're not plumb.
Something's unstable, something's out of
Something's not
square. Yeah.
exactly. Something's off.
Well, and I think that's a good place to maybe bring this back around to the initial topic and kind of tie a bow on this is that's what this kind of a relationship gets to do. And it's what it gets to be that any other relationship I've ever been in, including my own before we started doing this work together, doesn't give us that opportunity because we don't feel like as the man, as the masculine, as the dominant, we get to actually look at those things and we get to fix them, and we're conscious about how we're relating with each other so that we are making things better. We're not avoiding the problems. Like, at least that's how it always worked in the past in all of my relationships and in our marriage for the first 10 years was you just try not to make waves. You try to avoid anything that's going to cause problems, and you just end up with all these little things. Now you've kept, to use the construction analogy, you saw that there was a problem and you just put something over it so you didn't have to look at it, and you kept building the house, but now you got all the
Right.
shaky shit down at the bottom level of it, and now we're just constantly trying to patch it up. We're trying to fix it. We're trying to deal with all of these things
And there needs
that
to be
we
a rehab. In a lot of relationships, they need a little demo and they need a
yep.
rehab and then they
That's
need
why
to
all these
rebuild.
collapses are so important. But
Right.
every single time that something falls apart, it gives you a chance to put it back together better.
Exactly.
And
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 especially because
that's
most of the time they weren't built very well in the beginning.
right. And that's what, I guess the difference in one part between the two of you starting out your relationship relatively early on with building things this way and sorting out these little foundational issues early in the relationship is something you've gotten to do where we built the whole damn house And we've had to try to rehab it without destroying the fact that we actually liked this house. We liked
Right.
what we where we lived. We liked each other. We wanted things to work, but there were all kinds of things that weren't working. So
Right. And I
by
think it,
avoiding by avoiding things and hiding from them because they're uncomfortable, you never get to enjoy living in the house because you're always looking at the problems.
that's true. And I think the consent, like what is the consent? That's the question that I might, if I was listening to this, I would be asking, like, what are we each consenting to? And I think the consent for me, when I enter into this, and for her, like it's an agreement that we're coming into this, that I'm going to hold this pole that's going to be the more dominant masculine pole, and she's going to hold this pole of being the feminine submissive pole. And that those poles, we are committed to staying and maintaining that polarity. What that leads to, if you do it, is that not just in sex, you in all of life, this pole retains the responsibility to create a structure and create an order and create a container. And this pole follows the leader. This pole leads in everything. And when this pole falters, part of the agreement too, kind of the safety clause of the whole thing, is that she's got a voice. She's
Mm-hmm.
got an express, so that when he's not showing up and he's not aware of it, she calls that out.
Yep.
And that your capacity to do that is the relationship,
Yep.
and your
And
capacity to hold that.
and he has to be willing to be called out and not get
Yes.
defensive
And
about
what
it, but
happens when she does that? This happens, and she just starts, and the whole
yep.
thing just becomes like something. It's not this. It another metaphor that comes to me. Think about. I went to this training for a horse whisperer, and I was thinking about it. It was like the old school relationships was like the way that people would take horses and still to this day, and they just train them, and it's really abusive, and it's just this like versus our relationship, which is more like a horse whisperer, which is like you're riding, it's just like a thing. Like you get to this place because you want that wild stallion, you want that wildness. But what happens with the horse whisperer is she's totally lined up with you, and you hitch and she goes and she becomes your wild stallion. You know what I mean? That's what it feels like. And that's the whole art of it, getting to that place.
I can't think of a better place to end this recording and this conversation than right there. And she becomes your wild stallion. Hey, great conversation today, buddy. I really
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you,
it and
Andrew.
enjoyed it as always.
Yeah.